Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure today to introduce Heather Buttivant, our speaker for this morning. Heather, of course, is well known to most of us, or to many of us, a good friend of Coastwise, has led us on some really great field trips to some Cornish beaches. Heather is still exploring local beaches, sharing interesting finds, encouraging others to learn about and care for the wildlife through events and writing. She volunteers with the Cornwall Wildlife Trust and the Loo Marine Conservation Group and leads rock pooling events for local schools and youth groups. Heather's also published a couple of books, articles, and a blog, Cornish Rock Pools. With no further ado, I'd like to welcome Heather.
Welcome. I'm going to do something slightly different today to my usual identification talks and pretty things in the rock pools. We're going to be doing something a little bit gruesome. We'll be looking at stings and toxins in the rock pools. There are a number of animals in the rock pools that have their own chemical weaponry. So we'll be exploring a little bit about why they have those weapons and how they work. So let's see, there we go. So Leisha has already very kindly introduced me. As she says, I am a keen amateur rather than having any marine biology background officially, but having grown up literally in the Cornish rock pools, spending a lot of time on the shore, I've always had a big fascination, as I know a lot of you have as well, with all of the marine life there. I've learned about it over many years. And as I've grown up, I've had the great pleasure of being able to share that with lots of children, especially through the Cornwall Wildlife Trust, taking their wildlife watch groups out on the shore. I often work with schools and other youth groups as well. And one of my absolute favourite things to do, as a lot of you know, is to take Coastwise out on events. Because together we can share a huge amount of knowledge and find some very exciting things every time we go out. So that's always one of my top things to do. I published the book in the middle, which is aimed at grown-ups, nature writing book about what you can find in the rock pools. And the one on the left, which is packed with activities, hands-on things that children can do to understand and explore the shore, understand how tides work, what different animals live there, how they survive, by lots of just hands-on experiments and making stuff. And it also looks at conservation, which is, I worked for quite a few years for Friends of the Earth and for a climate change charity. I've got a very big interest in conservation. And although most of what I do is promoting what's beautiful out there, my main aim is to make people love it and enjoy it so they want to look after it. And we've all got an investment in that. So today we'll be looking at chemical weaponry in the rock pools. I'm just going to do something here so I can see what I'm doing. We've got a very beautiful weaver fish on the right. It takes a certain kind of person to love a weaver fish, but I do. So in today's talk, I'll be looking a bit at why animals benefit from having chemical weaponry. We'll talk a bit about the environment on the shore and what the advantages are. I'll look particularly at nematocysts. We've got a big emphasis on anemones and other stinging animals called cnidarians in this talk. But we'll also have a look towards the end at some other animals that make chemical weapons, like mollusks and our weaver fish, as pictured on the right. And alongside that, we'll look at some animals that use the toxins, those weapons that other animals have, by eating them and using those weapons for their own benefit. And we'll also have a look at animals that manage to live alongside and benefit from those animals. So there are all sorts of very, very interesting and weird relationships on the shore, which is my favorite thing to study and find out about. So I've got a picture here of a beach that those of you who've been down to Cornwall with me will likely be familiar with. This is Porthmeor on the north coast between Newquay and Padstow. Like your local North Devon beaches, it is a very exposed coast. You're straight onto the Atlantic. And as you can see in this photo, you've got very large waves. The seaweed is short and cropped. It's a tough environment. The shore especially, the sea generally, but the shore especially is a very tough environment. You have the tide coming in and also going out every day. So animals that need to be in the water can get exposed to the wind and the sun. You have rock pools that will heat up or cool down. The very cold weather we're having, the temperature can plummet in the middle of the summer. Those pools can be baking. As the pools get hotter and you get evaporation, the amount of salt in the rock pools will concentrate. So you can have a very salty environment, but equally with rain and fresh water flowing in, you can have a very brackish environment as well. So those changeable conditions make it a really tough place to survive for any plant or animal. And most of the animals we have living in the rock pools are specialists. They're meant to be there. We'll look at a few that get washed into pools and our shores. But generally, most of the things have chosen to live there and they're specially adapted. And one of the adaptations to surviving in that sort of environment is having some toxins, having some chemical weaponry. So my squidgy survival slide, there are a lot of animals in the sea who are surviving in these really stormy conditions. Imagine what it's like to be on one of these rocks with the waves crashing over, the intensity of that environment. And you have these tiny little squidgy jelly animals that are somehow surviving there. They don't look like they've got any protection. They don't look like they can do very much, and somehow they can cling on. And one of their many adaptations is that a lot of those squidgy animals will have some kind of toxin, sting that they can use to help them to survive. And those toxins can be used as defense from predators to stop themselves from being eaten, put things off. I don't think any of us would particularly want to put a weaver fish in our mouths. It's used for catching food, and I don't know if you can see in the center of the big stalked jellyfish, we've got two stalked jellyfish in this photo. These are lovely little animals that are closely related to the jellyfish you see swimming around in the sea, but instead of swimming around, they live attached to pieces, normally of seaweed, sometimes to rocks. You can see the big one has actually got a little bit of something in the middle. I can use a laser pointer there. I don't use zoom very often. So just here, you see this, there's a little thing trapped in there, looks like a little amphipod or something that's been trapped in there. Okay, so they can use them to catch their food, and they can also use those stings, toxins, to defend their territory often from other animals who also have stinging cells. Okay, so all sorts of uses, and really important to try and survive in this harsh environment. So we'll look quite a lot at anemones. Anemones are a type of cnidarian. That's the broad family that they're in. I don't know if I'm saying cnidarian right, or the Latin names you'll hear today are my interpretation of what they sound like. Feel free to correct me or to provide your own alternatives. So cnidarians have jelly-like bodies, just like the stalked jellyfish we saw in the last photo. They're radially symmetric. They usually have tentacles, and pretty much all the ones you'll see in the rock pools have some sort of tentacle. And what we'll be looking at today, they have specialist stinging cells, the cnidocytes. Okay, and the cnidocytes in anemones, jellyfish, corals, the things that we see in the rock pools are called nematocysts. So we'll take a look in a second at how those work. So cnidarians have all sorts of toxins. I won't go into, because I'm not an expert in it, exactly what all of these things are, but just be aware that there's not just one type of chemical they have. There's a whole variety, and a different animal may have a different set of toxins from another. So they may have peptides, which are short chain amino acids. So amino acids are used to build long chain proteins. So you might have peptides, enzymes, like what you have in your stomach to break things down, enzymes, proteins, long chain molecules, or non-protein toxins. The main thing is that all of these chemicals over many, many years of evolution have developed to help the animal in some way. So anemone toxins are mostly harmless to people. I'd be interested to know, perhaps when we chat at the end, whether anybody has had a reaction to anemone. Some people do react to snake lox anemones, particularly if you're wading through water with lots of big snake lox anemones during the summer. But unless you have a major allergic reaction to an anemone sting, they're mostly harmless. And a lot of the stings won't actually quite go through our nice thick skin. So you'll find that if you touch an anemone, it will feel a bit sticky, but you won't actually feel any sting. What we always say on events is not to touch your eyes afterwards, because compared to the fingers skin, your membrane on your eye is much, much thinner. And you're therefore more likely to feel a sting on your eye, which wouldn't be very nice. So some jellyfish and hydrozoans have potent toxins. We'll look at some things we get in our waters. Fortunately, most of the things that we find around the UK are not extreme in terms of their potency. But if you go traveling and come across things like the box jellyfish, they have very, very potent toxins that can cause pain, swelling, rashes, paralysis, and kill you, which is lovely. Fortunately, our little anemones are not generally going to kill you, like I say, and they use their nematocysts mainly to catch food. So here's little beadlet anemone, it's photo taken down on the lizard. This weird little yellow blob here is a salp, a kind of swimming sea squirt. We've had quite a few. I expect you have in North Devon, you can tell me about it as well, but over the last few years we've had quite a lot of those washed in, and I found quite a lot of anemones feasting on these salps when they were washed in. And on the same beach on the same day, the slide I had at the beginning with the anemone with a sand eel in it being eaten, that was on the same day at that beach down on the lizard. Now, my son has put together a little animation, which we'll hopefully be able to play in a second, to show you a little bit how nematocysts work. So nematocysts are lots and lots and lots and lots of tiny cells that are in the skin of those anemone tentacles. And when something comes into contact, brushes against them, the water moves next to them, they feel something, they will fire. So inside each of these, they're represented by the green vase shaped. Inside each nematocyst, each little green vase, they're not green vases in reality. This is just my son's interpretation. You have a coiled rope type structure with a harpoon, a spiky harpoon on the end. And when anything brushes against them, they will fire out that harpoon, that stringy substance uncoils, and those spiky bits will lodge into the skin of whatever is passing and inject neurotoxins, inject toxins to try and paralyze the prey. Okay, so I'll see whether I can get this to work. There we go. So something comes close and they fire in. There we go. So I should play that again. My son had many happy hours devising this little animation for you, so I will play it at least twice and say a big thank you to Louis for that. There we go. So that's roughly how nematocyst works, and it's why if you touch anemones on the shore, like a little beadlet anemone, it will feel sticky. You know, you touch an anemone's tentacles and it feels sticky, and
Heather,
that is, yeah.
Sorry, can I just ask, the nematocyst, is that the process, or is that, so that's the process of an anemone squirting out, effectively releasing the toxin, or is the nematocyst the noun, the name of the part of the anemone that has?
Oh yeah, so nematocysts are the stinging cells, so it's the name of the little cell that has that in it.
Right.
And that is how those cells fire out their toxins. Yeah.
Thank you.
No worries. I've now got another little thing. I've got a video here showing you a pool that is absolutely rammed full of snake lox anemones. And I can't remember if I've shown you this one before, so apologies, this isn't new to you. But it's just to show, because we often think of anemones as just being little blobs that sit there and don't do much. As you'll see in this video, a fly lands on the surface of this pool and you'll be able to see the anemones moving and dragging it straight under the surface. Okay. So just as a demonstration of how they use those stinging cells. So as the fly lands, it will show you in a second where it is. It will brush those anemone tentacles, fire out all those nematocysts, and sensing that happening, the anemone will then pull the fly in towards its mouth. And there are lots of anemones here, all competing. Okay, did everyone see that all right? So that little fly just disappears in a second. Okay, so eating is obviously a really important thing for survival in the rock pools. To defend themselves, anemones also obviously have the nematocysts in their tentacles, which will put some animals off. But a lot of anemones also have something called acontia, which are these strange little white threads that you can see here. So these strange little coiled white threads will get squirted out by the anemone if it feels like it's under attack. So some anemones will do it if you just brush against them. Some seem more worried about things than others and have more acontia than others. So particular species tend to have a lot of acontia, some have none. But when they do have them, if anything seems to be attacking them, if you accidentally prod an anemone or move a stone that it's on, it may squirt out all these little white threads. And these are packed full of those nematocysts, the same sort of cells that are in the tentacles, which are designed to cover the animal's body, make it hard for anything to come and eat it. It protects the column. The anemone can pull in all its tentacles, but still have all those stinging cells out, because of course the tentacles are particularly vulnerable to being nibbled off. Okay, so those are acontia. They also use them for fighting, and the beadlet anemone is really well known for it. They've got these blue little tentacles around the edge. So we all notice the big red tentacles, but as well as that, they've got these little blue baubles around the edge, which are rather pretty. Those are also packed with stinging cells, with the nematocysts, and they use them to try and keep hold of their territory. If another anemone comes too close to their nice open pool where they're able to catch lots of things that are swimming past, they need to establish their territory, make sure that they can catch plenty of food, and they will hit in very slow motion the other anemone with their blue stinging cells. These are two strawberry anemones on the shore, which I concluded were probably mid-fight. If you look, the one on the right has its tentacles all retracted in. The one on the left seems to be reaching out and trying to bash it. So I think these two were mid-fight. And so those stinging cells are important, not just to find food, but also to try and make sure you're in the best place for food. On the rocky shore, obviously it's a pretty harsh environment. You want to be in the best position possible to keep yourself alive. And just because they're anemones, I just wanted to show some beautiful anemones because they are rather lovely. And, you know, I recognise in Coastwise we have quite a big spread of knowledge of rockpool wildlife, obviously. So for some of you, all of these will be very, very familiar. For others, this might be useful little identification guide as well. So we have lots of different species that appear in our rock pools. All of these anemones, I think that I'm going to show, will be found easily in North Devon, just as they are where I am at the moment in South Cornwall. This is the snake-locks anemone. We saw those earlier eating the fly. So as you saw in that video, they were quite browny, sort of buff colour, but they can be this beautiful vivid green with purple tips. They have lots and lots of wavy tentacles, and they don't, unlike the beadlet anemone that pulls all of those tentacles in very neatly, so you can just see those blue beadlets around the outside. The snake-locks anemone, if it's out of water, just droops and is a messy tangle. It doesn't pull its tentacles in the same way. One of my absolute favourites is the dahlia anemone. This has very chunky tentacles, shorter, chunky tentacles, and they always look kind of hollow. I don't know if you can see, like the the ends always look like more like tubes than solid tentacles. And they come in a variety of colors, but have these beautiful stripes down the middle and stripy tentacles. You see different bands of different colors on the tentacles. And when they're closed up, they're normally covered in bits of pebble and sand because they have a sticky substance on their column, on their main body. Another of my complete favorites is the gem anemone. I always think it looks like a little zebra with these stripy tentacles, the sort of black and white tentacles, and this amazing green mouth with the 2 pink spots. When they're closed up, they look all warty. You can see the edge of the column down here. The warty look is, it tends to have little white stripes up the side of it. They're quite distinctive when you find them, and they're closed up, quite easy to identify, even if you can't see that mouth and the stripy tentacles. They're tiny, you have to really look, but if you go out on any Coastwise events, I'm sure people will point them out if you haven't seen them before. They are quite lovely. And being on the North Coast, I'm guessing you get plenty of strawberry anemones up there. I know they are limited to quite a southern range. I didn't sort of realise till I was talking to friends in Wales that they just don't normally get them in North Wales. So they're quite a southerly species and very distinctive because they look like a strawberry. You've got these lovely yellow flecks. And you can see that the strawberry anemone is very, very closely related to the beadlet. And there has been a lot of discussion over the years on how many species there are of beadlet or strawberry anemone. I'm not sure if that's ever been resolved, but you can just see in here that it's got those little blue beadlet tentacles for fighting, just like the beadlet anemone ones we saw earlier. And it was the strawberry anemones that we saw fighting. So that figures. I'm a fan of daisy anemones as well. Daisy anemones, you can see it's got layers and layers and layers of short tentacles around the edge. That's the main distinguishing feature. I always think with the daisy, lots and lots and lots of short tentacles are just like the layers of petals on a daisy. They come in a huge range of colors. On some beaches, they're always orange and brown. This is one of my local beaches where they sometimes become quite flamboyant and turn pink and purple. Other places they're often yellow or grey, so very variable. And just to complete my little roundup of what anemones are like, a really great property of anemones is that they fluoresce. So if you shine ultraviolet light on them, which is invisible to our eye, they will take in that ultraviolet light and immediately re-emit it at a visible frequency, which makes them, to our eyes, glow in really interesting colours. The classic one that people find on the shore at night with the UV torch is the snake locks anemone, and you can see it glowing really bright green. And they will glow really bright green, even if they are actually brown rather than green. You know, said that they could be 2 different colours. Well, these ones weren't particularly green, but under ultraviolet light, they glowed bright green. That's the daisy anemone that we were just looking at on the bottom right, with lots of short tentacles. But you can see the center of it has gone an amazing red color, which isn't visible in normal light. And on the left, my absolute favorite, it's a bit mad in all lights, is the gem anemone. Now, we said you can still see those zebra stripes on the tentacles that we saw earlier. But now you can just about see the pink spots in the mouth, which have gone purple, not much of that green color, and these amazing bright neon orange lines radiating out, and these neon green or yellow edges to the tentacles. I was just absolutely fabulous. So those are caused by proteins. That fluorescence is caused by proteins in the anemone, and a lot of other sea creatures do it. You can see that some of that might be sponge or algae there is also fluorescing a bit. It may be to help protect themselves from the ultraviolet of the sun. You remember I said in the rock pools in summer, they're very exposed to the sun. It can get very hot. You've got a lot of sunshine, which obviously marine creatures don't particularly like. It may be a way of reflecting out all of that light. I don't know. It's, as far as I know, it doesn't have anything particular to do with the toxins, but I just wanted to show you that because it's rather lovely. So those are the anemones. I said that those were the members of a bigger family called the cnidarians that have those nematocyst stinging cells. And one that you're bound to see a lot of in North Devon are the jellyfish. They're not so much rock pool animals at all, but they live out at sea. But at certain times of year, they can wash in huge numbers, and therefore you will doubtless find them stranded in rock pools. This was in a bucket, I think, at one of my events where children have been scraping them off, and handily had collected pretty much all the most common species that you're likely to see. So at the top, the one with the brown lines is the compass jellyfish, with those radiating markings like the lines on a compass. This rather blue one here, although sometimes it could be brown, is called a blue jellyfish. Both of these two species, the compass and the blue, have a sting that you are likely to be able to feel if you brush against them, so be a bit wary. And although you can see here the tentacles look fairly short, but when they are in the sea and properly alive, they can have really quite long tentacles that drag a long way, so they're one to watch out for. And the tentacles, those nematocysts, because you remember we saw the animation of how they fire when anything brushes against them, that reaction is involuntary, and therefore it can carry on after the animal itself is effectively dead. So you pick up what is or seems to be a dead jellyfish, those tentacles may still sting you. Okay, just to be aware. And in the bottom right, we have a rather manky moon jellyfish. This one isn't in the best of health. When they're transparent jellyfish, and when they are on good form and alive and out there swimming, they look a bit like a cucumber slice with like 4 circles, and which are normally pink or blue or purple in the center. This one has clearly seen better days. So jellyfish are quite a common thing to see. I won't say a lot about those because they're not particularly rock pool animals. We've got one other that I'll show you in a minute, which or 2 others that wash in frequently that I'd like to show you, which are not jellyfish but hydrozoans. Don't worry too much, but there are lots of different categorizations of jelly-like things. So we've seen anemones, stalked jellyfish, and now they're free-swimming normal jellyfish. Then there are things called hydrozoans that look like jellyfish, and then hydroids, which are little things. I'll show you some photos in a minute, that grow mainly on seaweeds and rocks and sort of live attached to something, but they have a stage in their life cycle where they look very much like jellyfish. And then finally, you have corals, which are also cnidarians. They have stinging cells. So in particular, you're likely to come across cup corals. If you go out with experienced people on a low tide, you might well find some beautiful cup corals. And there are also dead man's fingers soft corals, which I believe you do find on some of the beaches around you. I don't tend to see them around the beaches I visit in Cornwall. I haven't actually got photos of those. But they look like what they sound like. Dead man's fingers are finger-like, soft, squidgy structures, which can be white or pink, depending on species. Okay, but they also have lots and lots of little stinging cells on tentacles in polyps on them. Okay, so the Portuguese man of war I wanted to briefly mention. We've looked at some jellyfish. This isn't a true jellyfish, it's a hydrozoan. It's a colony of different little animals that all have their own jobs. There's an animal that makes the float, if you like. There are little animals that make up the stinging tentacles. There are little animals that do the eating, and there are little animals that live their entire lives as the gonads of the animal. That is their whole purpose. And they're a colony, and they've all got their jobs within this colony, and they live together. Okay. So it's a bit of a weird structure, but I think pretty much everyone will know that despite being very, very beautiful and what my son described as a rainbow pasty, the Portuguese man of war is the most probably dangerous cnidarian, the most dangerous jelly-like thing that floats about in our seas around here. They have very long tentacles. You can just sort of see to the left. I'll show you in a second what the tentacles look like close up when they're alive. But they can be very long, and they extend. They're like elastic, and they can stretch out to many, many meters. So this is a Portuguese man of war tentacle in the water, and you can see it's got all of these little bits to it, and those those can stretch out. And that's why the tentacles can be like 10 meters long. So beware if you're ever in the water near those. I would suggest getting out personally, but they have a much stronger sting than other jellyfish. A much more benign little hydrozoan that we see floating about is this, the Velella velella. And they can wash up in enormous numbers because they have very short little tentacles with nematocysts on their underside, very, very short all around the edge. But what they do is they float on the surface of the sea, and they use, you see this sail structure on the top. They use that to allow themselves to be blown across the surface. And as their tentacles move through the water, they can just feed on whatever's there. So it propels them through the water, allowing them to find plenty of food. They end up washed up on our beaches because they've got no control over that sail and the direction they go. At which point they will dry out and they look almost like little bits of plastic. In fact, I've had people rush up to me on the beach and go, "Oh God, it's covered in plastic. What should we do?" And fortunately, just for once, it is Velella velella, the by the wind sailor, as a lot of people know it, by the wind sailor, because that sail, rather than plastic. Sadly, though, most beaches will have a lot of plastic as well. When you have those sorts of animals being blown in, I'll talk about some other relationships later between animals with toxins and other animals who manage to live among them. Look out for this, the violet bubble snail. Really beautiful. It looks delicate like a garden snail and is this beautiful blue or purple color, sort of lilac-y color. I was completely baffled the first time I found one as to what it even was. But what they do is they're a normal little snail, lives in there, and they create a big raft of bubbles. They spit out lots of mucus and make bubbles, and that allows them to float at the surface, where they float alongside the Portuguese man of war and by the wind sailors and things, and they will feed on those hydrozoans. They feed on the stinging animals, which is quite remarkable because not many things can eat a Portuguese man of war. Most things would be killed by it. But this little snail is perfectly adapted to feed on those animals, which is why when you get a lot of Portuguese man of war or Velella velella by the wind sailor stranded on your beach, it's a really good time to look out for these because they may have been blown in as well. Okay. We briefly saw stalked jellyfish earlier. So these are beautiful little things that are related to jellyfish, hydrozoans and anemones. You can see that they attach onto seaweed using a little sucker. They look a bit like an anemone with a column that goes up, and then they have 8 arms, a bit like the underside of a jellyfish, each tipped with some stinging tentacles, and that's where a lot of the nematocysts are in the tentacles. On stalked jellyfish, you also have these little white spots, if you see around here. Those white spots are also packed with nematocysts and presumably mostly act as a defense for the animal. Somebody else might know. If anybody wants to know about stalked jellyfish, Dave Fenwick's website, Stauromedusae, their family name is Stauromedusae, and I can share that with anybody who needs it. He's got a website dedicated to that, which tells you all about the different species, their ecology, their background, and is thoroughly brilliant. They are very, very beautiful and very tiny, and I've done events with Coastwise before just looking for these to make sure we get our eye in and learn how to identify the different species. We've got 4 different species here. This is Craterolophus, Convolvulus Craterolophus, which has quite stumpy arms and is sort of known for being a goblet shape. Okay, a goblet shape. I won't go into a lot of identification detail here, but I'd be happy to share it with anyone or take people out looking for these things. This is the same species on the previous slide, Calvadosia crux melitensis, or the Maltese cross stalk jelly, and it has all of these beautiful white spots, which we now know are packed with stinging cells. So, but probably with a stalk jellyfish, you're very unlikely to feel that toxin, just like the anemone, it's unlikely to penetrate your skin. Okay, and the mouth at the middle. This is the Campanulata, the bell-shaped one. I won't go into too much detail about them here. And then we have what I've always called the blobby one. You see in between each of its arms, in these little sort of armpits, it's got little blobs. And those are for helping it to loop over and sucker onto things. So it can sucker on quite easily when it's upside down as well as the right way up. Okay. But all of these creatures have lots of nematocysts, lots of stinging cells to allow them to trap little prey. This isn't a brilliant photo. It's a little bit blurry because the thing was absolutely tiny. As you can see a little bit, that's my finger nail on the right hand side, probably someone's fingernail anyway. Just to give you an idea of the scale of how tiny this thing is on little red seaweed. And you can see from the movement in the background, all of this was swaying around and moving. But this little stalk jellyfish has caught quite a substantial amphipod, a little sandhopper type animal. So they are really efficient. If they feel something, obviously they sting it to paralyze. All of these animals use what we call neurotoxins. They're designed to paralyze the prey, stop it moving, stop it wriggling, so they can easily catch it and pass them to the mouth. And all of these animals have had a mouth in their center. So they use those tentacles to pass it in. You can see this stalk jellyfish is completely shut up all its big tentacles to pull that poor creature into its mouth. Okay. So you also have hydroids, they're medusae. So hydroids also have little stinging cells. So this is kelp fur, Abelia geniculata, something that grows on kelp in the summer. You'll see it's just little white threads on the kelp, but you can see close up, it's got all these beautiful feathery tentacles. Those are packed with nematocysts, and they're designed to catch very, very tiny little bits of plankton and things that are floating past. In our rock pools, we have quite a few different species of hydroids. There's a few here. This one is quite unusual, the one on the left. We certainly see it in Cornwall. You might get it in Devon as well, called the candelabrum coxie. It's supposed to look like a candelabra, a candle stand. And this has all these white balls at the bottom. You see all these white balls, and those are packed with nematocysts as well. They're all full of neurotoxin stinging cells. The other hydroids look more like normal hydroids. We've got Carini pusilla over here, which always the stem of it looks like a little stack of dish plates. And again, those are full of nematocysts and these tentacles. And if you have seagrass locally, look out for hydroids on there as well. That's Lamamedia angulata. I have to write that down because I always forget it. So yeah, they specialize in living in different places, but they all have those stinging cells. I think this one is a video, which it's got some music. So turn down your sound if it's too loud. So you can see this one looks like a jellyfish, but it isn't. It's a baby hydroid, basically, a juvenile hydroid. The amazing things, these, they'll just float around and then very suddenly move, and it's incredibly fast. My son calls them rocket jellies. So yeah, and of course we always, I never remove anything from the shore unless it's just to identify it. So yeah, that is your little root arm jelly. Look out for tiny little swimming things like that in the rock pools, and in the summer especially. That's when most of the hydroids tend to release their medusae. They look just like jellyfish basically, but with very short tentacles. Okay, and the root arm jelly, I believe, actually has quite a powerful sting. Some of those little hydroid medusa, whereas the hydroids themselves won't particularly bother you, some of the hydroid medusa have quite intense stings. So be aware of that. And then we have corals, which are obviously just beautiful. The UK isn't particularly a country that's associated with corals, but we do have quite a few different species. And the ones that you can see in the rock pools tend to be the cup corals, or if you're lucky and live somewhere where they occur on the low tide, the dead man's fingers. Cup corals have, as they sound, a hard cup, a stony kind of construction in them, whereas the soft corals are just squidgy and full of little polyps. So the corals also have lots of stinging cells, which are packed into these tentacle structures here. And similarly, just like the other cnidarians, we've seen a mouth at the middle. So on the left, we have a scarlet and gold cup coral, which are absolutely beautiful. And on the right, we have Devonshire cup coral, which is also very beautiful. Being from Cornwall, I've given you a like manky cup instead of admitting that they are actually very beautiful, but they really are. When they are out, they have very translucent tentacles. But I actually included this to show you the shape of the cup. This is what you'll quite often see in the rock pools because it might be out of the water and retracted. And they have this oval ellipse sort of shape to the cup, whereas these ones have quite a rounded little cup. Just a couple more photos of the cup corals. They're really lovely things to find. They like places with very harsh waves, like the photo I showed you right at the beginning of Porthmere. That's a good place for them, as is, I'm sure, North Devon. You'll be able to tell me at the end where you find cup corals. And this is one it's actually washed in on a fishing net that I picked off a discarded fishing net that I dragged off a beach. There were a whole load of different creatures there, and so this is that internal stony structure of a cup coral. So you can see what that's like. Just a few minutes more. I wanted to go on and tell you a little bit about some other animals in the rock pools that have chemical weaponry, and then we'll look at some animals that live alongside them. Okay. The classic we mentioned right at the beginning is the weaver fish. Okay, so it comes from the French vivre, meaning viper. People often spell it W-E-A, and it doesn't have anything to do with weaving. They don't construct a nest or anything like that, like some fish do. It's a viper fish, a weaver fish. Okay, so the fish venom glands may have evolved from cells that helped the fish to control parasites, because obviously it can be quite difficult for a fish to pick off any parasites on its body. So some fish will have substances in their skin that will help to try and stop parasites attaching. So they think it may have had something to do with that. I don't think anyone knows for sure. I've been trying to look through all the papers on this. There are two species in British waters, the lesser weaver and the greater weaver. I particularly like the Trachinus draco. It sounds like a dragon, the dragonfish. But the one you'll tend to find in and around the rock pools on the shore, I certainly do, is the first one, the Echechithis vipera. I have no idea how to say that. Somebody will tell me later. But the viper fish, basically, weaver fish. Unlike the anemones that fire out their toxins, there's no mechanism in the weaver fish for doing that. It's just released by pressure on the spines. Okay, so anything presses on the spines, it will release that venom. And they have a dorsal fin on the back. I'll show you another my son creation in a second, showing you what they look like, because my photos don't show the fin very well. They also have a long spine just behind their gill, so sort of down below their eye to the back there. There's another long fin there. All of those can release venom. Okay, it's a mixture of toxins, enzymes, other substance. And in the greater weaver fish, the Trachinus draco, they produce a toxin that isn't found in any other species that we know of, called dracotoxin, which I always think of as dragon toxin, which is very, very cool. So it's not so cool if you stand on one or pick one up. Remember that they have that spine behind them. So if you pick them up, even pick them up from underneath, you may accidentally spear yourself. So don't pick one up without using a net or gloves if you need to pick one up for some unimaginable reason. As I'm sure you all know, they're pretty common on the North Devon coast. Their sting causes pain, inflammation. Sometimes they can cause a more serious reaction if somebody's particularly sensitive to the toxins. The treatment for standing on a weaver fish is hot water, greater than 39 degrees. You don't have to use boiling water, obviously that would be damaging, but also despite popular stories about weeing on jellyfish and weaver fish stings, that is not going to help. It wouldn't be hot enough to neutralize the venom. Okay, so those proteins and toxins will break down in temperatures above 39 degrees, but your wee would not be suitable, I'm pleased to say. Okay, just a little photo here of the weaver fish to show you how amazingly well they hide. This is a very small weaver fish, so in the pool it was almost invisible. The thing that gives it away is often those green eyes. That's what I would tend to look for. And also when they're busying themselves, burying themselves in the sand, you can see sand flying up as they get themselves settled. So those are the things to look for. But you see they're perfectly camouflaged. Here's a little image just to show you where the spines are. So they have a dorsal fin on the back here, their first dorsal fin, that has long spines in it. And then this is the other one I was saying, behind the gill. So if you pick that fish up around the side, avoiding the fin, you could also spear yourself with these fins. Okay, so thank you again to Louis for that. And I think they're quite adorable, but they do have a mouth that reminds me of like one of those big American garbage cans that opens up at the front. They've got a very high set mouth that flops down at the front, and a lot of very jaggedy teeth in there. But like I said, I'm fascinated by their eyes. They have this incredible green sheen to them, which I find quite lovely. So I wanted to point out to you that there are some things that have a reputation as possibly being venomous that are not. And what I wanted to mention is the long-spined sea scorpion, the Torulus bubalis, very common rock pool fish. They can change colour. They sit at the bottom of the pool because they don't have a swim bladder, and they've got these little barbels in the corner of their mouths that distinguish them from other sea scorpion species. Although some sea scorpions in other countries, especially in tropical places like Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean, are very venomous, our sea scorpion is not. There is nothing that is going to hurt you. And I remember when I was much younger coming across a group of youngsters who just held up this fish and proudly announced that they'd killed a sea scorpion. They might have called it a stonefish, because they do sit at the bottom, look like a stone, because why you would kill anything anyway when it's just living its life in the rock pool, don't get me started. But be aware that people can be very, very nervous of things that they are frightened of. So it's important to speak to people at public events about how this fish is harmless and needs to be looked after and not killed, and generally about looking after, obviously, as I know you do at all of your events, how to look after the animals safely so that they are comfortable and not harassed or hurt by any of us. But they're rather lovely, the sea scorpions. Again, it's a face that probably only a mother could love, but I find them quite fascinating. Other neurotoxins occur in worms. There are probably many, many more that aren't in this presentation. I can't cover everything, but a really common one is the bootlace worm. And if you've ever come across a bootlace worm, you'll know that they are incredibly long and quite disorganized. So they tend to end up tangled about themselves. And this is probably all one worm, all in a big coil. That's one end of the worm going out there, one end of the worm going out the other. They can measure several meters long. In theory, they are the world's longest animal, although I'm not sure if that's entirely proven. They're supposed to be longer than the blue whale. And they contain in their skin a mucus, which has a peptide toxin. And I've written this down so I don't forget it. It disrupts the flow of sodium ions, and the presence of sodium ions allows your body to conduct electrical signals, which are obviously really important for movement and coordination, and thinking and everything else. So those toxins are designed to affect the flow of sodium ions, so quite a nasty toxin. However, we don't go around eating bootlace worms. I wouldn't suggest licking one particularly, but other than that, they're not going to be particularly dangerous to anybody. Absolutely fine to handle on a if you need to on a rock pooling expedition. However, there are some more extreme toxins. There's something called the tetrodotoxin, TDX, and there is a non-native worm that has been found certainly around Cornwall, I think around Weymouth and some other sites, and probably is pretty much everywhere. A little kind of thready worm called Cephalothrix simula, but beautifully named the Pacific death worm by the tabloids. So the Pacific death worm has TDX in it. It's an extremely powerful toxin, the same one that's found in pufferfish, and it can bioaccumulate in a body. So if there's an animal that eats a lot of things that have TDX in it, it can bioaccumulate in their body. And as you go up the food chain, it biomagnifies. So an animal that eats lots of things that have accumulated that toxin in their bodies will take in all of those toxins into its own body, which can mean that it may not affect the animal itself, but if you were then to consume, say, shellfish that had these worms in it, or whatever, or been eating them, then you might have an extreme issue. It can potentially be fatal. The worms themselves have been known to have extreme levels of TDX in them. But again, you're not going to be eating worms on the beach. I would always suggest you wash your hands when you come off the beach for all sorts of reasons, not least the amount of sewage our dear government is pumping into the seas at the moment. But yeah, always wash your hands. There's probably nothing to be particularly worried about, but just be aware that some worms have large amounts of toxins. Mollusks also have a lot of toxins. One that's very common on the shore is this snail called the dog whelk. And they go about drilling holes into other mollusks particularly, and turning them to soup and sucking out their insides, which is all very beautiful. One of the things that helps them to do that is that in their salivary glands, they push out their radula, their special tongue-like organ, drill into the animal, and then they can use their saliva to digest, and their salivary glands are full of neurotoxins. It means that the animal, once they've drilled their hole in, will be paralyzed and unable to do very much about the attack. However, lots of animals have developed their own defenses to this, and you can see in this bottom picture, this is a mussel, very common bivalve, so just a normal blue mussel. It has squirted out lots of these little threads, these called byssus threads. They squirt those out all over to try and trap the dog whelk and prevent it from drilling into things. If they sense a dog whelk in them, they squirt out all these byssus threads, and this particular dog whelk has been completely trapped upside down. It's going to dry out and die either of starvation or by drying out in the wind because it's upside down. So the mussels and other organisms aren't always completely defenseless either. And I had on that side that cuttlefish and squid, octopus can also have neurotoxins that they use to help paralyze prey. It wouldn't be a talk from me without some sea slugs. Anyone knows me knows I love sea slugs. Sea slugs are also known for having all sorts of chemical weaponry. A common one is acid. So we've got the plumed Bertha, Berthella plumula, on the left, this lovely yellow slug. There's a pair of them here, one here and one here. And on the right, we have an animal called Gatodoris planata, or Disco Doris, as I still call it, and its friend, and there's actually two of them in this photo. That yellow one is also a Gatodoris planata. Okay, so these slugs live in the ocean, feed on all sorts of things, and they take in, probably from their prey, various toxins that they then secrete to put other animals off eating them. You can see that they look pretty defenseless. They're just jelly blobs. But if you were, I don't recommend this at all for the slug or for yourself, if you were to squish a Berthella plumula, it would excrete a load of acid, I think sulfuric acid. It would be enough to make your hand bubble a bit. Similarly, the Gatodoris planata, if you see these white spots on its back, these sort of white areas, those are acid glands. And again, if anything attacks it, it will push out a lot of toxins through its skin. So acid in this case, which, as you can imagine, very strong acid is not something that any animal wants to get on its mouth. Another clever little device that the slugs use, you'll probably mostly be familiar with the great grey sea slug, very common slug around our shore. This is Aeolidia philomenae, with this white V shape on its head. That's one of the main, and all of these long shaggy serrata. It looks like a sheep. I call it a sheep slug. And these feed on anemones. So here's one that the slug is down here, and it is headfirst into that anemone, tucking in. And it is able to eat it without being affected by the stinging cells. It's perfectly happy eating it. But what it does is it retains those stinging cells in its skin. So all those long serrata on its back become filled with the stinging cells, as well as with the pigment from the anemone. So you can see this one was quite white, but after it's eaten, it's looking nice and fat and pink. It takes on colour from the anemone, but it's also taken on those stinging cells. So once it's eaten, if anything tries to come along and eats the slug, those nematocysts from the anemone, those little cells that fire the toxins in with their harpoons, will be fired out of the slug's serrata into the mouth of whatever's trying to eat it. So really clever little device. And finally, there are animals that live alongside these creatures. We saw the bubble snail earlier that manages to just feast on the Portuguese man of war. We've seen the great grey sea slug that can eat snake locks, anemones and things without being too bothered. There are some others as well. And for some of these animals, it's a way of life. They live alongside with the anemone, and they probably benefit from the defenses of having the anemone's tentacles around them, that most other animals won't come near it because it's too dangerous. But they also, because they can be messy eaters, like the crab on the right, they might create little scraps of food which provide extra food of the anemone, for the anemone when they're eating. I haven't got a photo of it here, but we've seen the weaver fish. Not such a beneficial relationship for the weaver fish, but there is an isopod. They're a bit like woodlice isopods, marine isopods. There are lots of different species. They look like little kind of woodlice, and there is one species that actually feeds on the weaver fish. It attaches itself to the weaver fish's tongue and eats it, replaces the weaver fish's tongue effectively. It can get so big. If anybody feels like looking in the mouth of a weaver fish, you may find one of those isopods in there. I have to say, I don't tend to look in the mouths of weaver fish. So if anybody has photos they want to share, they're very welcome, but I haven't done that. Also, there are little amphipods that live inside the bells of jellyfish. So little sandhoppers, like our stalk jellyfish was eating earlier, can live inside the bell of jellyfish. So, you know, it's worth, particularly in barrel jellyfish, have a little look. You can find these specialized little species of amphipod, and they always live in the bells of jellyfish, which is pretty cool. So here's the little crab from the previous slide, living in its happy place beside a great big snake locks anemone. So you can see hopefully the crab here, that's its eyes and legs coming off. They're quite well camouflaged because they cover themselves in sponges, which may be part of their defense. Somehow they manage to be immune to the toxins of the snake locks anemone. I think it's something a bit similar to the clownfish. If you've ever watched clownfish darting in and out of the tentacles of the anemone, they constantly go in and out, and they develop their immunity to it by being in constant contact and having substances presumably on their skin that allow themselves to not be affected by the nematocysts. There was a pretty horrible experiment on these poor creatures using, but science is science, and there are certain experiments that it's the only way to decide these things, I guess. But there was this experiment where I think acetone was used on the skin of the Leach's spider crab, and then if the crabs, after they had that substance put on them, which would have removed any protective chemicals they had, if you put that crab back in a snake locks anemone, then they would be killed by the snake locks anemone. So they have some kind of protective substance on them, which allows them to be unaffected by the snake locks anemone, which is probably the most powerful sting of all our anemones. And they can live there, obviously benefiting from that protection. The other one I always notice, there are always lots of little tiny mysid prawns. And if you see these little kind of brown things with the white stripe along their backs, these little mysid prawns, tiny little prawns, and they tend to float in clouds around snake locks anemones without getting eaten by them. perfectly happily, and they seem to get some kind of protection from them as well. I don't know quite how they do that, whether they do it in the same way as clownfish and now Leach's spider crab, but someone may know, but I haven't managed to find out anything more about that one. There's also a new species for the UK that's moved into some very southern waters, been found around Dorset, been found around Jersey and the Channel Islands, of a little prawn that specializes in living inside snake locks anemones. Quite a colorful, like blue spotty prawn. It's probably only going to be seen by divers, but I keep looking for it anyway because I really want to see it. I haven't found it yet. But yes, look out for things that live alongside anemones. Here's another relationship, the parasitic anemone. So this big blobby anemone, which is on the back of a whelk shell. So they associate with a hermit crab. So living inside this whelk shell is a Pagurus bernardus, the common hermit crab, Bernard the hermit, as I call it. And the anemone will grow on the shell. For the anemone, it means it gets transported around and it gets to have bits of food that if you ever watch a hermit crab eating, they're very, very messy eaters. They'll throw bits of food everywhere. So the anemone presumably benefits from all of those things. Whether the crab benefits much from the protection of the anemone, it might well do from having those stinging cells. But sometimes there are several anemones on a shell to the extent that it looks like it would be almost impossible for the crab to move about anymore. So how beneficial it is to the crab, I don't know, but that's another relationship. So we have seen what the toxins are in the rock pools, why these animals have them for their own defense, to defend their territories, for feeding. We've looked at various different types of animals in the rock pools that have these defenses, whether it's mucus toxins, spines that inject venom, the nematocyst cells in anemones and jellyfish. And we've also seen some animals that take advantage and have specially evolved to live amongst anemone tentacles or to eat those toxins and use them for their own purposes. So stay safe. Like I say, there is very, very little out there in our rock pools, fortunately, that can do you any serious harm. Just remember to tell anybody at events, especially children, to remember to wash their hands before they eat. And watch out for, I would suggest encouraging people not to pick jellyfish up unless they really know which ones sting and which ones don't. Okay. But yeah, that's my talk. I hope you enjoyed that. And yeah, I'd be very happy to take questions. I think we're going to have a break first and then I'll take some questions. Thank you.